Well, good evening, everyone. Am I coming through, Dave? Hey. My name is Bob Rose, in case you didn't know, and I think most of you do, but it's indeed my honor and privilege to be your host this evening. And this is the fourth in our series of presentations and lectures about businesses and properties and professions that have contributed to the growth and the goodness of our great community. Tonight we're talking about family businesses that have been here for a good long time, and you're going to hear how they developed and how they are still in business doing great things even today. So our first presenter tonight is Chris Bjornstad, and Chris is a partner in Cornwall, Avery, Bjornstad, and Scott, and he's also a developer, and he did some developing of property down the street from the law office, and he has a name that is very, very familiar with downtown Spencer in the retail business, and so it is my pleasure to introduce Chris Bjornstad. Please give him a warm welcome.
So what's being passed out is I just to give you an idea of Spencer 70 years ago. This was an Iowa alumni review, and it came out in October 1954. And did everybody get one? Okay, good. So it's fun to look at. I mean, it's from the University of Iowa, and it's a big article about Spencer and the University of Iowa graduates who were in Spencer. So on the very first very first picture page, there's a picture of the Cornwall family, and some of you would remember Wilson Cornwall, and he's on the far right there. He had a brother named Morgan Cornwall who was on the far left, and then in the middle was Dean Cornwall. And the Cornwalls, have actually been in practice in Spencer since about 1892, and Morgan and his wife had, I think, 6 children. One of them was Marion, and there's a picture there of Marion. Her husband that she married was Francis Kretzmeyer. See, and that, I don't know if many of you would remember who X Kretzmeyer was, but he was the coach of the Iowa track team. And the Kretzmeyers were from Emmitsburg, I think, and their dad was a doctor, Dr. Kretzmeyer. It was just, when I was at Iowa, then the Kretzmeyers would have me over for dinner, which was really nice when I was a student. And I lived in Melrose Circle, which is about a block from Kinnick Stadium. So those were all the Cornwalls, and so many of them did go to Iowa. Some of you might remember W.F. Johnson, who was the superintendent of the Spencer School District for a while. Mrs. Dean King, they lived down on East 4th Street. I don't know if some of you would remember Marge Carroll, and at Carroll's Bakery, and she graduated in 1942 from Iowa. Dr. Larson, he was a dentist. I was up above the Eddie Quinn building, that dates you, I guess, where at 5th and Grand, which used to be the bank, but I was upstairs, and there's this door that says, Dr. Leonard Larson, welcome, come in. So I'd always like to find a way to get that to Dave Larson, their son, who is a lawyer and a magistrate up in, or judge, I'm sorry, up in Spirit Lake. Then the next page, these were a lot of the doctors, Dr. Fieselman, Dr. King, Dr. Eddington, Lyle Frink, Mrs. Fern or Gordon McKinnon. Then, of course, any of you who are old and Republican would remember Barb Avery, who was Miss Republican. And like and that's her brother Alden Avery, and and their dad was named Pops Avery. I think he was in the Iowa legislature for years and years. I remember once that Barb was always selling tickets to some Republican function, and finally my dad said he got so tired of buying tickets, he said, "I'm a Democrat, Barb." So I've changed just for that. So and then Barb ended up living at the hotel after her mother died. And I always remember having lunch with Joe Green, who was another legend, I think, from Spencer. And I remember Barb saying, "Well, what do you think of President Clinton?" And Joe Green says, "I think he's the best thing since Roosevelt." And Barb wasn't happy with that reply. So, down in the lower left-hand corner was June Asher, and her husband was Blaine Asher, and Scott's dad, Fred Moore, started the A&M Laundry, which was Asher and Moore. That's what A&M stands for. Murray Underwood, who was a judge here. Faye Underwood is still living, and she's in the nursing home, St. Luke's, right. And then Earl Hoover, who was the county attorney. And then on the next page was Otto Bjornstad, who he said, 1935, he was a pharmacist, and that he now handles the store where his father operated in 1931 when there was the Spencer fire. Then in the upper right-hand corner, and I want to give a copy of this to Paul C., is a picture of his dad, Bob C. In the lower right corner is Joe Carroll, and Tom and Katie, there's a one right over there for the, yeah, okay. No, there's another one, though. Maybe I don't, but I'll get one for you. Okay. In the lower right hand, everybody would remember Joe Carroll, too, with his wife, Jean Clark, and Carroll's Bakery. What I got a kick out when I was looking at this, again, this is from Iowa, but it says in the lower right, in the middle of it, it says, "We're impressed also with the youth of the average businessman in the community. When we voiced this thought to Ben Shine, he made a quick mental survey of Main Street and we believe was a bit surprised. He said, up and down the street, I can think of only one businessman who's over 60 years of age." So I don't know if that's true today or not. But and then on I think it's the last page, well, next to last page, some of you will remember some of these other names. Frank Snyder, who was actually from Iowa City. Some of you would remember he was the president of the Clay County National Bank. Fred Moore, Molly's dad, my uncle, ran the A&M Laundry and an abstract office. And John Greer, who was a legendary trial lawyer, and I'll mention more shortly. Jim Maroney, who had Maroney's clothing store. Marvin Cruz, who was a wonderful guy. Bob Carpenter. I sent this to his two grandsons yesterday, and they really got a kick out of it. Benny Shine, and then his brother Babe, who was a doctor. And so anyway, that is some of the people that, if you look at the last page, and this kind of leads into the McAllister block. The McAllister block, in the second column, it says, in taking pictures for this article, we started at the office of John Greer over Bjornstad's drugstore. And then Dr. Frazier, Dr. Walding were located in the same building. So were the Cornwalls and Alden Avery. But they weren't partners. It wasn't Cornwall and Avery. It was Cornwall and Cornwall. And Alden had his own office, and Gordon and Jim Norvell. So they were up on the top floor of the McAllister block. The McAllister block was actually formed in 1925, and they bought the building, the owners, from the First National Bank, this is in 1925, for $65,000. And then in 1931, I think everybody who's from Spencer knows the building burned down. Supposedly there's a history that the oldest child in the Bjornstad family knows who did it, but I'm the oldest child now, and I don't know who started the fire, and I don't need to know. The building, of course, was rebuilt. It's a fortress. Basically, when you think of the McAllister block, you think of three separate components. There was Bjornstad Drug, which was at 4th and Grand. There was Bjornstad Hardware, which was next to it, and then there was the upstairs floor. On the Bjornstads, my great-grandparents were Bjorn and Anna, and I put some of their wedding information up at the front desk if anybody would have an interest. They came from Norway. They owned 40 acres just south and west of Fostoria. And they bought the 40 acres for $2,500, and that was in 1901. Their neighbors were the Symingtons, and that's why I think the Bjornstads and Symingtons are still friends today, because they would clear the path so that the children could go to the country school. And they helped form the Little Sioux Lutheran Church, which many of you know is north and west of Fostoria. One of their children, Louis Bjornstad, and Tom, you're the one that knows this, is buried on the farm. Two of them are. Who was the other one? Arnold. Okay. So two of the children died and are buried on the farm. And it's interesting because if you sell land today, you have to answer this question on, it's called a groundwater hazard statement, and you have to say, is there anyone buried on your property? Well, people always laugh, well, a cat or a dog, but in the country, there were people who were buried on the farm. So the farm is now owned by George Heikens. Some of you know Kathy Christensen, and that's her brother who owns the farm. But they moved to town. The Bjornstads are not good farmers, I don't think. So Bjorn was a carpenter. He built what was the first Congregational church. He built Dick and Mary Jean Montgomery's house, and but they moved to town. So as I said, Otto ran the Bjornstad Drug. Ben and his brother Art, my grandfather ran Bjornstad Hardware. And upstairs, as we said, were a number of offices, including the Cornwalls and the Averys. And it's interesting to me, and I was talking with Dick Montgomery a little about this, I brought this too because in about 1956, 2 years later, the Bjornstads and Cornwalls were sued. And the basis of the dispute was that in 1941, there was an agreement between J.O. Birdsall and Carey Birdsall, and we'll talk about them shortly, and Morgan and Wilson and Ruth Cornwall. And the suit was based on an agreement, and it actually went to the Iowa Supreme Court. The agreement says that in the event that J.O. Birdsall or Carey would die, it is their intention that the stock pass to the survivor. But if both J.O. and Carey die, then the executor is instructed to sell the stock, their stock, to Morgan and Wilson Cornwall at $1,000 per unit. So, and the Supreme Court went on to say the reason for making this agreement, and this was right in the agreement, is that J.O. Birdsall, Morgan, and Wilson have worked together in handling this building and desire that their stock will pass to and be kept in their respective families, so long as the families desire. Well, both of the Birdsalls died. Mrs. Birdsall was the last to die, and she died in July of 1955. And the Cornwalls and the Bjornstads tendered the $1,000 per unit. And the executor of the Birdsall estate says, no, that's too cheap. And, that's not fair. So, and the Supreme Court said, well, there's no dispute. That building is now worth, a lot more. But what I always liked is, because then the claim was that the Birdsalls, it would be inequitable. But this is what the trial court said, and this is what the Supreme Court said. It is appropriate to repeat that there is not the slightest evidence of any misconduct, fraud, concealment, overreaching, coercion, violation, breach of property, or misunderstanding. If the agreement appears profitable to the advantage of the Cornwalls and Bjornstads, I think it is because the Supreme Court and the Birdsalls wanted it that way. And that was true, because it went both ways. If the Cornwalls had died, then the Birdsalls had to buy at the same time. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but what's always struck me, and this is what I was telling Dick about, is the Birdsalls were represented by three lawyers, one of whom was John J. Greer, one of them who was Ed Kelly from Kelly and Spies in Emmitsburg. And the third one was Luke Lenan. And that was very powerful trio of lawyers. Ed Kelly, you may remember his son, Dr. Ed Kelly. His daughter is Peggy Bear, and some of you would know Peggy or Mrs. Mike Bear. And I always got a kick out of Ed Kelly's widow telling me that when the lawyer Ed Kelly, who was extremely intelligent, was working in Emmitsburg as a young lawyer, old man Spies, who was probably the wealthiest man in the history of Palo Alto County, said to Mr. Kelly, you know, I really like you as my lawyer, but I can't have a Democrat as a lawyer. And Ed Kelly says, no problem. And became a Republican right on the spot. So, yeah. So those three, and then the Cornwalls were represented by Alden Avery. So, but it was interesting, and I won't say who, but, you know, and of course, I'm old now, but at one time I was one of those, you know, like, what was it, little pitchers have big ears. And I remember somebody saying that John Greer was cross-examining Morgan Cornwall on the stand about some document. And Morgan, according to one of the Cornwalls, said, you ought to know, John, you stole it from our safe. So, but I can't imagine they're all on the same floor working together. I mean, how do you go to your office when you're being, you know, when somebody's suing you, you know, saying you took advantage of this widow? So, but, and I'll get moving here. Morgan, as I said, was always one of my mother's favorites, and it was fun. He would come out to see my parents. We grew up on East 3rd Street across from the football field. And there was a picture of Dr. Fiesman there. And young people can't believe this. But and Dr. Fiesman's son and I John Fiesman were on the same football team, Spencer High School team. And if Dr. Fiesman was at the game and got a call, it would go to our house on East 3rd Street, and my mother would turn on the porch light. And that was Dr. Fiesman's note that he had to call the hospital. I mean, there weren't cell phones, you know, it was just, that's how it worked. So. And then in 1975, Tom, you would remember this because you and I did this it moved to where Jimmy John's is now. And I think we were all there on Sunday morning, you know, because Bob and Wally didn't want to spend the money to hire somebody, they hired their kids.
Flatbed trailers pulled by us.
Yeah. But that was a long time ago, yeah. So, and then eventually, the hen house, I think, occupies what was the Bjornstad drug. Right, okay. And so what happened in about 1990 is that the McAllister block actually now includes the old Clay County National Bank, and it includes the Belltone addition where J.P. Greer practices. And what we did is we condominiumized the McAllister block. So units 1 and 2 are owned now by the hen house. Unit 3 is the Second Century Partners, which is Steve Avery, Chris Bjornstad, and Dave Scott. We don't know that there'll be a third century, you know, of lawyers there, but who knows? The upstairs apartments are owned by the people who own the hen house, and then J.P. Greer owns the Belltone building. So, that's the McAllister block side. I just briefly will cover actually my favorite store, and it was owned at one time by the same Birdsell family, but on the other half by the Moores, by Fred Moore, Earl Moore, and they owned it. And actually, if you look, the Moore Birdsell building is where, some of you would remember, it was Coast to Coast. And it is now the Cannon Moss Brigger Associates. My great-grandfather, Molly's great-grandfather, the Moores and the Birdsels bought that building in 1919 for $18,000. And it used to have a post office, I think, upstairs, and a telephone company. But naturally, by the time I bought my mother out, the second floor was all gone. People didn't want to be in second floors anymore. They didn't. So the present building was built in 1922, which means next year it will be 100 years old and still in a member of the Moore family, because the Moores, and then Benny Shine, who's also in your list, bought out the Birdsels, and there was no litigation whatsoever. So, and then eventually I bought my mother out, and I was talking to my son the other day, and I said, you know, when I bought my mother out in 1977, I paid 9% interest for 15 years. And I said, our first house when we bought was 10.75%. And my one son said, Dad, I just got a mortgage at 3%. What's wrong with you? And he said, you didn't do a very good deal, you know. And no lawyer likes to hear from his son. Well, you didn't. I said, well, I didn't have a lot of choice. I was a little blunter than that. But those of you who remember the 1970s and early 80s, interest, you know. So anyway, so in my office, I have a picture of that my mother gave to me. And it's a picture of my grandfather, Earl Moore, and a picture of my grandfather, Arthur Bjornstad. And it's the 1919 Owls Club meeting. But my mother said outside of their wedding, Earl Moore, who was Irish, Catholic, Democrat, Arthur Bjornstad, who was Lutheran, Protestant, one-time Congregational, Republican. He said that was probably one of the few times they ever got together. So, and so the only other thing I want to say just about that side of the family, because I mentioned Bjorn, I want to be fair to the Moore side, is it is true that that Fred Moore and then Earl Moore, and Fred married Mary Ann Toohey. Earl Moore married Jane Kelly. So my mother's side of the family and they actually came from, I think, they came from County Mayo, and they came from, I believe, County Tipperary in Ireland. So that's really all. I just hope that helps. I give you some idea.
McAllister,
There,
he has a relative. He's got grandpa or grandma that's McAllister, right? So how did
no,
he get his name?
Collister. Collister. Yeah. I don't know. I really don't know. I just know it was like as I said, in about 1925, there was the McAllister Block Company, and they purchased the McAllister Block, but we call the McAllister Block. And then there were a number of partners over the years. One of the partners, interestingly enough, was a fellow named Hansen, and he died, and he was from Denmark, and the Danish consulate had to approve the sale of the Hansen shares to the Birdsels, and that's how the Birdsels. I think it'd be sometimes interesting to figure out more about the Birdsell family, but because they had never had any children. And the son, who was executor, lived at 218 East 4th Street. So if we could figure out who, I'd like to drive by there someday. Thank you.
Chris?
Thank you. Any more questions?
Well, I was just gonna say, one thing you might mention is that after the fire, our grandfathers and Uncle Otto, Friar was on Friday, a week from the following Monday, they were back in business in the middle of West 4th Street in a tin building
Yeah, yeah,
with inventory.
yeah. See, Tom Howe's mother, in case you didn't know that, was a Bjornstad. So here we are.
There we are. Hey, thank you very much, Chris. Our next presentation is Tim Steffan, and Tim is second generation furniture dealer here in Spencer, and has a great story to tell us. So please welcome Tim Steffan.
I want to thank my friendly competitor, Bob, for the introduction. We have been in business for 69 years this year. I'm second generation. The store started in 1952 when my father went as a business partner with Dwayne Mann. That building was located at the old Fraser Theater building, which is Don Hemphill's office. In 1953, we moved to 406 Grand, which is currently the Beehive building. That's one I remember the most. In 1954, Dwayne Mann passed away and Wyman bought out his share of the business. And we expanded the staff to 3 people, Wyman, Ralph Tabor, in Howard Hewitt. Howard used to work for Montgomery Wards and always told me the stories about back in the old days being open Saturday nights till midnight because Spencer was a very happening place. Gotta go higher. Okay, all right. 1955, we hired a bookkeeper by the name of Mabel Byram. Her husband Mac used to run the John dealership across the street or behind Jimmy John's, basically, where the little hair hut type building is at. That was the John dealer in town at that time. I didn't know this until Mabel's passing away, but she's the only person I know that has traveled by covered wagon. She did that as a child. They moved back from Colorado to Iowa down by Peterson. In 1963, Twetten's built a new building a couple blocks east of where our current location, and we moved into the Redfield building, which was owned by Howard and Irma Summers. And we bought that with John Greer as a partner, or my father did, I should say. And the Greers have been, Steffans have been partners for years and years and years in different projects. In the 1960s, we leased the back end of Campbell Higgins Mummert building for a warehouse. And I remember driving trucks back and forth between there and the store before I ever had a license. Never got caught. In 1967, I started part-time in the summers. I was making 50 cents an hour. Next year, it got doubled to $1 an hour. I was working too much, working too often to be able to spend it. In the 1970s, we bought the old Gulf gas station at the corner of East 5th and First Avenue East. It's kind of a L-shaped building. The shorty who used to run it decided to retire, and we bought it. We had a nice big floor covering job come with the new Northwest Federal building that we're currently in. When that was renovated, they put the second story in the elevator, and we imported some very expensive woven wool carpet from England to do that project. And while the carpet was stored in that warehouse, it burned down. The carpet didn't burn because it's wool, got singed on the edges, but didn't smell very good. So we ended up having to scramble to get some more carpet from England to do the building because it was just about ready to go. In the 1980s, Paul Maurer did a design addition for us, and we put a balcony level in on our second level of the store. We have four floors in our building, served by an elevator. Jerry Huber did that construction. In 1984, I became a partner in the business with my father. Our next expansion was in the 1990s when Nelson Drug got bought out by White Drug, also bought Bjornstad Drug. And I think Dwayne Calvig maybe got bought out that time by White Drug. And they expanded down to the corner of 4th and Grand. When we were cleaning out the basement of the Nelson Drug Store underneath the stairway, I found a coffee can size of DDT, half gone. I asked Bob, what do you use this for? He said, well, Dr. Schlichtenmeyer mixed it with half talcum powder, DDT, and I'll leave up to your imagination what it was used for. I'm not going to tell you. Maybe after the meeting. In the 1990s, we bought another warehouse over on, in fact, I'll back up for just a second. We bought another warehouse where Crescent Electric used to be, which is currently Fringe Beauty Shop and also was Hartzell and Johnson's barbershop for years and years. Then also in the 1990s, we bought another warehouse about a block and a half north of here on West 7th Street. 2002, we bought the K&D building from the Bob Carpenter family after they retired and have expanded into there. And we have not approached Paul or Colleen Thompson at the Carol's Bakery about expanding into there because I think I'm done. Currently, we have 26,000 square feet of space in our current building, all full up of furniture. We have an 8,700 square feet of warehouse space. Again, a very well-served elevator to service it. Spencer in the home furnishings business, back when Bob was highly involved back in the 70s, this is before the big box stores. Spencer's pull factor in furniture was 2.5 to 3 times what a city our size would normally have. So we have Twetton's, McCarney's, Steffan, Matt's, Van Warn, and some others selling furniture. So that's one of the reasons we have so many furniture stores in town. And we still have a good pull factor. We do business Arizona, Florida, all through the Midwest. Most of our business is within a 60-mile radius around Spencer. So be happy to answer questions if anybody's got any.
Chris, or Tim, did you happen to find the old fluoroscope machine?
No,
You bought the candy?
no. We did find some civil defense stuff at the old where White Drug is located at. When they moved down there, they had water, crackers, toilet paper, and things like that in cardboard barrels in the basement.
Can you sing a song you used to be on for Candy Brewery?
No. And I want to thank Nancy Bell for giving us our trademark Steffan Furniture, where generations of beautiful homes begin. So she's the one that came up with that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. It's always amazed me that the businesses that we have, so many of them are multi-generational. And in most of the cases, when the next generation comes along, they improve, they make it better. It grows. And that is so obvious with Tim and Chris, and even probably more so our next presenter from Carey's Electronics. And you can just imagine how that has evolved over the years, from black and white TVs or no TVs at all, and radio, and how that has developed into state-of-the-art electronics now. So our next presenter, Mark Carey.
Thanks, Bob. Our story is going to parallel a lot of what you've heard this evening. Both of these families have been great friends of ours over the years, and we're really indebted to them. When Tim was up, with COVID a year ago, we were all shutting down, and I remember one evening I got a text from Tom Nelson, and Tim was included, and we kind of grew up together in Spencer Main Street, and we were kind of, what are you going to do? I don't know. What are you going to do? What do you think about this? I don't know. What do you think about that? And one thing that was universally held was, gee, I wish I could have talked to my dad. I'd like to hear what he had to say about that. And none of us had the opportunity to do that. So as I was thinking about our history, it's really a story of my father and when he came to town and his growth within the community. And even he's been gone 12 or 13 years now. And even now, decisions we make every day really go back to him. So I'm going to go back to how he came to town and started working here. But I'm going to go back a little bit further. Our store is Carey's Electronics now, but it was Carey's TV and Stereo at one time. And before that, it was a business called Ed's Radio Ray, and many of you will remember that. Ed Holscher was a guy from South Dakota that he was post-World War I. He hung out in Sioux City for a while and was kind of a techie type. Decided he wanted to go into private business. And at the time, there was a group of franchisee called Radio Ray, and his deal was radios, but Radio Ray would franchise stores, and they became a buying group, and I think there was probably half a dozen of them scattered throughout the Midwest. So if Bob bought the franchise, he would go to such and such town and be Bob's Radio Ray. There might be a Tim's Radio Ray and a Frank's Radio Ray, and here in Spencer, we got Ed's Radio Array because Ed was Ed Holscher. He started the business in our current location at 220 Grand. Ed was a tinkerer, and he loved electronics. He loved radios. He loved switching mechanisms and anything electronics with the battery or power that he could make do stuff. That was his thing. The store at that time did furnaces, and they did white goods. They did radios. They did a variety of things that made their living, but radios was kind of his passion. He wasn't really a people person, if you would. He's more of a back room bench type technician, and that's where his comfort zone was. In 1946, my dad was just out of the service, and he had some electronics experience in the service, and but when he came to town, he was driving a pop truck for Spencer Grocery, and he wanted to get into the electronics industry, and he loved radios. And when you think about it, radios were pretty high tech. It was kind of the iPhone of that era. So to get into electronics, that was a big deal. And an opportunity arose at Ed's Radio Array, and he took it. And it turned out that the match was pretty good because they were good opposites. Opposites attracted here. Ed was the bench techie tinkerer type. My dad was the people person that wanted to get out and run service calls and set up systems and sell and do all that sort of thing. So they made a pretty good team. They complemented each other. In that era, of course, televisions were just on the horizon. But in the 1940s, kind of tough to sell TVs around here because there wasn't any television stations. It wasn't until 1948 that KSTP up in the cities started broadcasting, and Ed and my father glommed right onto that and decided they were going to bring a TV to town, but they had to get signal. So they started building antennas. You could buy a commercial antenna at the time. There were people trying to sell them, but Ed was convinced that they were too expensive. He could build it cheaper and better. And he became kind of obsessed with it, and he built, Dad said for 2 years, that's about all he thought about was antennas. Kind of reminds me of John's story about his grandpa last week, that he was tinkering with his foot feed. Well, that was Ed's deal. He was making antennas. So they built, he'd build a couple antennas a week, and they'd have to put them on a tower and try it, and they'd play with the signal. And they wound up building a tower that they could crank down, and then so they could easily put antennas up and down. They had a lot of fun with it, and they would show their TV in the front window. St. Paul's a long ways away. Today, you'd struggle to get a TV signal from St. Paul. Transmission's different, the rules are different, the airwaves are different, of course, but on a good day, maybe you'd pick up a signal, but they would do that. And the Saturday nights in town, which was mentioned earlier, were kind of legendary. That was the nights the stores were open, and so people would come to town. The stores would stay open until about 9 o'clock or so, but they'd always show the TV program out on the front sidewalk and always attract a big crowd. That was a big deal for them. The picture was pretty snowy. They could hardly see a picture, but that was a big deal. Spencer's downtown was bustling at that time, and the stories are legendary from that era. Another thing would happen is that the farmers would come to town and they'd bring their radios in at noon or in the early afternoon and expect to pick them up on their way out of town. So someone said earlier about the stores being open till midnight. That was the comment from my dad, is that they'd fixed radios till midnight sometime before the farmers got out of the bars and the restaurants and headed home. So that was kind of a neat era. It wasn't until about the mid-50s when the Sioux City and Sioux Falls stations started, and that's when TVs first started to pick up, because to spend the money on a television and antenna system to get a snowy picture out of St. Paul is one thing, but to get a picture out of, you could get a lot easier out of Sioux Falls and Sioux City, really enabled the TV industry in our area to take off. So they started selling TVs a lot more and building their antennas, still building their own. One day a guy walked into the store and he says, Mr. Holscher, I'd like to sell you an antenna that I'm building. And Ed, if you knew Ed, he could be a little belligerent. And he says, no, you can't sell us one as good as we can build it. And he says, well, let's try it. So they cranked the tower down, put the antenna up, and they spent the day up and down comparing antennas. And Ed sent him packing, and he says, ours are better, I can do them cheaper, so nice try, but good luck to you. About 6 months later, he walked back in, and he says, remember me? And Ed says, yeah, I didn't think we'd ever see you again. And the guy says, well, I got a new design, let's try it out. So down the tower went, the antenna went on, up, down. Drive my dad nuts. Because we're wasting time. That was right up Ed's alley. To make a long story short, the guy that brought the antenna in was Mr. Weingard, John Weingard, and he was the guy that developed Weingard antennas, which are a legendary Iowa company out of Burlington, one of the most famous antenna manufacturers in the country, anyway. So it was kind of a nice little anecdote from back then. The mid-50s to the late 60s, early 70s are really a golden years of television, and they enjoyed a lot of success and growth as all of the TV businesses. Tim was talking about the furniture stores in town, how many of them there were, and same with the TV dealers. There was Kepler's. Did you work for Kepler? Did you? Okay. There was Kepler's and Graham's and Herbster's, Herbster Electric, and Nielsen's, and EB's was Kepler's. There was Sears and Montgomery Ward's, and all of those had full TV showrooms. Half of the names mentioned had private service shops. We're down to one in town now. They did installations and antennas and all that kind of stuff, and they all thrived. Every little town in the area, Terrell, Gillett Grove, Webb, Royal, everywhere had a TV dealer in town, and they could do really well by selling their televisions. It was fair trade time at that time. Selling their TVs, servicing them, putting up antennas, and you could make a pretty darn good living doing that. So Ed's was like that. They enjoyed that time. We went from a time when it was hard to get a TV signal and hard to sell TVs. When the local TV station started, Sioux City and Sioux Falls, people could put a tower up with direct antennas and pick those signals up and expect to get a good TV signal. Where back in the St. Paul time, it was a really iffy sort of a deal. So TV started to take off then, but it was expensive to do that. So, and Dave might be able to help me with this. At a certain point in time, a bunch of Spencer businessmen got together and put up a tower next to Fostoria, and it was a huge tower that would pick up the TV signals from Sioux City and Sioux Falls. They would retransmit it to Spencer and the Lakes, and that became called the Spencer Area Television System, or SPAT. And at that time, then people could, with a little antenna on top of their house, could aim it towards Fostoria, and they could get all the major networks. And that was a big deal. So TV sales exploded, antenna sales exploded, and it was a glorious time in the TV business in our area. My memories growing up is that every house in town had a pipe on top of it with a little antenna heading towards Fostoria. When the storms would come through, it'd wipe them all out. They'd put them back up. So eventually cable came to town, and that kind of killed the antenna business, at least the in-town cable business. And the Ed's business started to dwindle a little bit. But they kept hammering away. Ed was getting older. By the 70s, it was getting retirement age for him. And my father kept plugging away and kept doing the service and selling stuff, but it was getting to be a harder task for those two. When it was time for him to retire, he hung around probably a little bit longer than he should, And my dad was encouraged to either go out on his own, work out of his house. He could have made a good living, kind of running out the clock doing that, or opening a store of his own. And he was about 50. And, you think about it, at 50 years old, you want to make that commitment and that sort of thing. And I remember one time, it was about, I graduated in 74, and at the dinner table, somebody said that, why don't you just open up a store of your own? And my dad says, well, if I could find some young guy that might want to go into business, I might do that. Oh, who would that be, So this did come up in conversation several times, a couple times over the years, until it finally dawned on me that he was talking to me. Okay, I'm a little slow on the uptake, but I met my wife, and we were starting a young family, and we decided to go into business. And so in 1978, my dad took the business over, and it went from Ed's Radio Ray to Carey's TV and Stereo. And you remember, we grew up in that 60s era, and you think of all the grand names that were downtown, and we wanted to be one of those. And that's why we named it Carey's. We thought the TV and Stereo kind of summed up everything that we did. Dad did the TV, and then my addition to the company was the stereo or the hi-fi. So off we went. Business started out, it was good. I think a lot of people were gratified that my father had gone into business. I did all the Ed's thing because Dad, over this time, had developed a clientele through service. He'd kind of developed a way of doing business that was very successful for us. It fit us very well, and service was really his bag. And that's why I included all that in the past. So that carried off in the future. And as we started in the late 70s and the early 80s, things were pretty good, and we kept getting a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger every year until the ag crisis hit. And the interest rates that we were talking about, that was tough on everybody. The money wasn't going through town very fast at that time. It was tough to be in business at that time. And I remember at one time, I came home and I said, it didn't come home. I was at the back of the shop. I'd come in from a long day at work. I says, Dad, we're working too hard. There's got to be a better way than this. And he says, we can always go to work for somebody else. We're doing okay. Let's just hang in there. And we did. And as we got through that ag crisis, and as that ended, and as business picked up, there's a little lesson in there. Business is cyclical. And we've learned that over the years with every little downturn and every recession, every glitch in the business cycle. If you can hang through there is a reward at the end of the tunnel. And there certainly was for us at the end of the egg crisis, because people were ready to spend money, and we happened to be there. We'd made it through, and we were there to do business. When we first started, of course, we're a Quasar dealer. You all probably remember that, and Motorola Quasar. When we went into hi-fi business, we had a hard time collecting good lines because nobody knew us. We're just a mom and pop shop. And but at that time, we snagged a line, and then we snagged another one, and then that started to steamroll. And by the end of the 80s, we were growing a lot, and it was really exciting. About that time, though, we found we were out of room. A couple of things had happened. We'd taken car audio on, and that exploded. And then the hi-fi had exploded, and the TVs were always doing good and always needed a lot of room. So we wound up, we were pressed for room, and we thought, what do we move? What do we do? But the Clay County Seed building came up for sale. We bought that. We tore it down and put up a new building, eventually like 92 or 93. And we did installs out of the back shops there, and that was our automotive installs, and that was a good deal. We'd been doing them out in the alley all year round before that. That was tough, but that's kind of what you did. And that was another catalyst. It was kind of, if you build it, they will come. And as we did that, we're really nervous. We're biting off more than we can chew, and it was just a smart thing for us to do and all this kind of stuff. And it just turned out that the community rewarded us by supporting us, and that was such a wonderful thing, really fun. And so business was great then. Our business cycle after after that building was built, and as we grew and kind of diversifying a little bit, it's just kind of a steady, slow growth cycle with a couple little bumps. We eventually bought the warehouse behind us. We have our big warehouse. That's the old home bread building. Our big warehouse is back there. It's where our trucks are, a bunch of our inventory, et cetera, et cetera. The A&M Laundry building, if you will. And then we have some rentals up front. Over the years, in business, in our industry, you have to adapt. We've always been trying to find out from the community what it is that they need from us. How can we be of service? TVs are a constant. We've always done that. But over the years, we've expanded into a lot of things. We're not just a retail company. We do a lot of contracting. We used to be a retail company that kind of dabbled in contracting, and now we call ourselves a contracting company that dabbles in retail. Retail has changed, and anybody on Main Street will tell you it's tough out there. It's an online internet world now, and buying habits have changed. So you have to find something to diversify a little bit, and that's what we do. And now we not only sell out of the front with our electronics, but we do systems. We do smart homes, and we do systems like this, projectors. This is our system. We do streaming systems for churches and sound systems, and the stuff you can do from your phone now. We do homes where from your phone you sounds like an advertisement, doesn't it? Right. But from your phone you can turn your lights off and on. You can lock and unlock your doors. You can adjust your heating and air conditioning. You can put your shades up and down. You can do just about anything you can imagine. The only limit is your imagination. So we have guys that do that. I don't do it, but I have smart young people that do. So we've been 3 generations of Careys. My father, who, like I said earlier, is still the heart of the business. Myself. My son Joe came in 1996, and if you call our store, chances are he will answer. If you think you're calling for me and Joe answers, you'll go, "Hey, Mark," da-da-da-da. He'll say, "No, this is Joe. Just a second, I'll get him." Or if I answer the phone, they start thinking it's Joe. I'll say, "Nope, just a second. This is Mark. I'll get him." So he sounds a lot like me. So he came in '96. He runs our showroom floor and does our advertising. He's the voice on the radio. He's our connection with Main Street, and he's our energy. And then my son Adam came in 2011, and he's a technician. So if you've had a system installed by us, chances are, a TV or anything, chances are he's been there on the setup or the service. We currently have 10 employees. I was counting the employees earlier today, and I stopped at 31, and I thought, well, we've had 31 people over the years that have had full-time jobs out of our little place. It's now at 35. We keep thinking of, oh, remember that guy? Remember that redhead that did the car audio back? Oh, yeah, what was his name? Oh, yeah, I liked him. And so we're at 35 and maybe counting. But the secret was really my father's unselfishness, his hard work, his care of his customers that built that foundation. And the way he handed the business off, it supported our family for 3 generations, 4 or 5 families within our family. But think of the 35 people. All those people had made a living out of our store. And it all kind of started with his concept of how to do business. So that's all I got. Thank What was that? I know there's a joke here someplace. But.
When you had a black and white television, your dad would come out to get our TV, and he would shop, but he would bring us a color television. Do you think my mom would let him not? He sold a color television, and he brought back the black and white one that the kids got in the basement. Because your dad was a super marketer and a
Yeah, it's kind of sly, yeah.
Your place up on the second floor have done well too. People attend them.
Yeah, that's a fun little thing. There's just a way, we kind of like, it's something we can give back to the community, so that's fun. She's talking about our,
Store too.
pardon me?
It gets them in the front
Oh,
door.
it does, yeah. She's talking about the foreign films that we do with Arts on Grand, so, yeah, we have a lot of fun with that. But. And a year off, yeah. Yeah, that's right. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, 3 minutes to go, and it's been a great evening. I've learned lots of things I didn't know before, a lot of things I did, because I've been here a long time too. But yeah, it's just amazing to me to listen to the stories and to have a little bit of information about it and lived with it, and I'm glad that we were able to bring this to you. I want to thank my fellow committee members, Tom Howell, Dave Schaefer. You guys want to say anything? You know, we got one session left next Tuesday, and these two have put a lot of work into it, and so has Maureen Ashland. Where is she? There she is, yes. Preservation Committee that is sort of the sponsor of this series, and it's been great. And one more to go next Tuesday. It's entitled The Development of Spencer, and as I understand, it's more the technical details of how a city starts and how you plot out the Kirby, are you on? Are you doing that one? Okay. Well, anyway.
Bob, did you get, in the Carney's furniture, you know, didn't you get flooded out in the year that we had the big flood?
We did a lot of sandbagging in, 93, it was gone by then, but there were several high water over the years. We've sandbagged, and, you know, we never did get any water inside, but, yeah, that South Spencer is probably below the floodplain, isn't it, Kirby? So, anyway, thank you all for being here this evening, and we'll see you next Tuesday, is it? Tuesday night, and it's the development of Spencer and how it all came to be. So, thanks again.